So I can officially welcome Suzanne Wood-Fisher to Fresh Fiction Virtual Book Club. Thanks for joining us tonight.
That is a mouthful, isn't it? It's a lot of FFF, Fresh Fiction Fisher. Hey, I really enjoyed listening to all the different people and their thoughts and their books. And I was writing down all the different book suggestions and loved the candor. And yeah, I really appreciated Sarah's last comment about the things that disappoint us. And I thought, what a great book title that would be. Doesn't that sound like that would
be from all over the place, right?
Yeah.
You heard, we read things all over the map, all different types of books, which kind of brings us back to the first question. I want to start with you on, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you first got started writing, because you also write different types of books that we want to dig into.
Yes, and thank you for noticing that. So because I'm probably best known for writing about the old order Amish, but I actually write historical fiction, and then I write contemporary women's fiction as well. And I think when you have an overabundance of curiosity, it's just so fun to kind of explore all these different things. The reason I first started writing about the old order Amish is because my grandfather was raised plain. He's from an area near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and he was one of 11 children. And he was actually what they called German Baptist, with some of your readers, your avid readers. I'm so impressed with them. They might know of, they're sort of like a tree of the Anabaptists. And it began with, and the Anabaptist means to be sort of a baptized as an adult. And it's started in the 1500s after the Reformation, and it seems like such a small thing to have an adult baptism instead of an infant baptism. But at the time, it was really like civil anarchy. It was how the church kept records, tax records. It's how the government kept tax records. And these people, beginning with Menno Simons, the Mennonites, had this belief of adult baptism, and they were persecuted and chased across Europe. And yet the Anabaptists kept splitting. And all these little factions, which is so typical of churches today. And my grandfather was the German Baptist. So that's where I come from. And that's my authentic connection to the old order Amish. And when an editor had known of my connection, she wanted to really see if we could work on a nonfiction book. And that was what I began with, because I used to be and I'm kind of going roundabout to answer your question, Samantha, but I will get to it. I had been a magazine writer for years and years and years. And so I started as a nonfiction writer with a book called Amish Peace, Simple Wisdom for a Complicated World.
And I knew you wrote nonfiction about Amish, but I didn't realize you started with that.
Yeah.
Huh, okay.
And it was kind of a foundation, because it was really like, I have a lot of relatives, so they're a great resource. But to go to the old order Amish was literally like, I went back east and I went to Elizabethtown College, where there's a lot of professors that are teaching about these different sociological groups. There's I went knocking on doors. I met with everybody I could possibly find a connection to. But it really, even still, I kind of go back to the writing of that book, because it just gave me this very open-eyed understanding that they're not one size fits all. There are so many different kinds of Amish, and from super ultra conservative, that's part of Lost and Found, to really, really progressive, where you almost wouldn't know that you don't share, that they are plain people. That's what they call themselves, plain people. So anyway, that's kind of the answer to your question. And from there, I've kind of branched into other book genres as well. And now it's almost 40 books, I think. So it's.
Well, talk about then the transition from the nonfiction stories and books about Amish to writing Amish romance. Because I have to admit, I read Amish romance. I read all different types of books. And whenever I've brought up with friends that are perhaps not quite as avid readers and talking about all the different kinds of books, and I mention Amish romance, they're like, excuse me, what?
Yeah.
What?
I know.
So knowing that you started for the nonfiction and then transitioned into Amish romance, what was that like? And what was kind of the impetus behind that?
Well, let me ask you a question too. So when you are with your friends who are readers, is there sort of an embarrassment, like almost like Amish fiction, and there's sort of an eye rolling a little bit? You can be honest.
Again, this is mostly for some of the ones that are not big
Super.
avid readers of romance. And so they focus in on the combination between the two sometimes. So it's not necessarily an eye rolling, but frankly, a lot of them are still in ideas of romance if it's all bodice ripper
Oh,
type, right? And so already you're kind of combating against that belief.
yeah.
But then they're like, wait a second, they're writing romances for Amish, about Amish. How is that working? I mean, what happens with the love story? I mean, there's a lot of curiosity. So I wouldn't say it's the eye rolling, but it's like, seriously, they've got books that targeted, and
Mhm.
it's more confusion.
So, well, to go back to your question about how did I transition from nonfiction to fiction, I had I had written a book, a fiction book, a World War II love story, published with a small royalty press. I'm a big believer in small starts, and so I had kind of put my foot out there in the fiction world and had a, no, I wouldn't say a lot of confidence in that, but I definitely had tried, and the book had done well, and it had won some awards, which is easier to do with a little, a small press. And when I wrote this book Amish piece, my editor at that point was the one who kind of encouraged me to pitch a proposal for Amish fiction. And at the time it was like jumping on a wave. And I didn't even expect that. I didn't know that because I was kind of coming at this in a different way. It was, the nonfiction book was very much about getting beyond the bonnets and beards and buggies to what makes the people the way they are. How are they different? How are we the same? What do we have to learn from them? Not trying to make them perfect, but just they have held on for 400 to 500 years to their traditions and have a remarkable stability, as well as lower, even just little things like lower cancer rates, lower heart disease, lower, depression, things like that. So as a whole, they are a really stable, I think a fairly contented people. And very different from when you look at our population that is, there's a loneliness epidemic, there's things like that. I think the sense of community and faith and all. So to sort of weave that into fiction was so fun and I loved it. And I mentioned this wave cresting, it was really right as the Amish fiction, it had probably already been, rising, but then I was blessed enough to catch it and had really an open door to people who, just like you're saying, people are curious. They're curious about the Amish, they're curious about how they live, and then romance. Romance seems like an oxymoron, but there is love there. There is a lot of genuine love and romance and sparks, modest, but
Well, and you alluded to the differences in the area also. My brother lives out in the middle of nowhere, Missouri, and for a while had some Amish neighbors. And yes, the curiosity did come to the forefront for me also. I'm like, okay, wait a second, what about this and what about that? And he'd tell me stories, and he'd pass them on the road, him in his truck with his giant dog, and his Amish neighbor in his buggy with the horse and the dog and the horse. I mean, just all these cute things. But the thing I always find fascinating with your books is the mix of different things. And frankly, I never know what to expect when I do pick up one of your books. So, like with the current latest book, where, like you said, you've got the older, more conservative branch versus and I love it, just the beachy Amish, right?
Mhm.
And the differences between those. How is it that, and what is the key for you to pull in these different aspects so that we are getting that bit of unexpectedness that we might not typically think of when we are thinking Amish romance?
Yeah, and I like taking the real story of the Amish, and they are not all one size fits all. There is such variation. There's, over 1900 churches, and they're each one is a standalone. So there's not this overriding bishop. Every single church has their own church ministry and their, ministers, deacon, and the bishop. And so you get so much variation from one group might allow cell phones out in the barn, and another group would consider that to be something that would be sinful and verboten. And so it's just so much fun because they're always surprising you, and the way they are. Even after 15 years of writing, it still surprised me. They still kind of startle me with how they, oh, I'll visit some friends back in some of the areas that I've gone to. And for example, this will shock you. There's a Amish bishop in Ohio who is just one of the smartest men I've ever known in my whole life. He is self-taught, self-learned, and a delegation from North Korea came to his home to meet with him because of his farming practices. I mean, Samantha, have you
Wow.
ever heard of ever hearing of North Korea? And here they come to a farm, an Amish farm in the middle of Ohio. I mean, that's what I mean. They are remarkable people. And I'm not saying they are all remarkable, but many of them are so worthy of, really studying and learning more.
So what is your process when you're pulling together the story then? Is it the characters that come to you? Is it these types of stories and the situation that you're like, oh, I really want to somehow incorporate that into one of my stories? Or is it the plot? What comes first to you?
I think I usually take an issue. So in Lost and Found, for example, there is a conflict of a progressive, we would call it liberal, a more progressive church that moves into this little town, and they're kind of squeezing out this more moderate, more in the central, let's say, old order Amish church that I write all of my novels are taking place in the same little town because it's sort of familiar characters in and out, and everybody loves a small town. And so this progressive church is really squeezing, and they're not only kind of buying up the farmland, but they're doing something that has always been a worry for the Amish, and that is the temptation of the youth to, leave and head over to the more progressive because kids are kids. So when they see this family's having, computers in the house and iPads, and which is common, it's not unusual for more progressive um, types of church to allow some of that. So what they tend to do though, when they are confronted with something like this, is historically they pick up and move on. They don't have a head-on clash, and that's why the Amish keep moving along. They keep heading. They haven't hit California, but they're in Montana. They're in. They're really coming west. They're north. They're south, and so the idea was to take a group that would be like a scouting team and maybe send them to another location to just check it out. And that's where this old, super conservative group, the scouting team ends up unexpectedly in this very ultra conservative area, which is true. And I actually traveled there and it was fascinating to just see the differences. I'm so isolated, so remote, homes that were so plain they did not even have flowers, which is not typical. Most Amish homes, their gardens are like their quilts. That's sort of their artwork. And so to see just, these extremely plain white houses, yet they had this blue door. All of them had this charming blue door. And the answer for it is simply tradition. It's just no one knows why. It just always is fun. But it's kind of one of those things that surprise you. And then my husband was actually traveling with me, and he's pointed out something so interesting, which is the homes, and this was in a sort of a southwest-ish, central-ish part of Tennessee, very isolated, but a lot of good farmland. And the Swartzentrubers, that's the super conservative group, have settled there with a number of different areas. And my husband said, the Amish homes, they're not fancy, but they're so clean and tidy. And you get back on the roads with the non-Amish, and they're a mess. Like, just rusty old tractors in the front, and cars and trucks and wheels, and just a dump. And it was just sort of an interesting little contrast. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of the fun of just studying how these people live. This is America.
True. Definitely. Do you find that your approach and mindset is different from when you're writing books like Lost and Found and the Amish romance versus your historical fiction versus your contemporaries?
Well, I would say that probably the Amish is a little more similar to contemporary, a little more like I'm shifting gears, but it's a lot of the small town. It's a lot of kind of being taking people out of their environment and into a coastal or a island or something like that. So and the community is still there. So in some ways it's not all that different, even though a lot of the techniques can be different and a lot of the mechanics and even things like just how quickly information can go with a text and versus a phone shanty. But the historical fiction is a whole different beast because there you're really working with so many limitations, and I love it because of that, because you have to just really dig deep and find out what makes these people the way they are. What are they, where do they come from? Our country is still so young, so you go to places and foods, names, things like that, they're from Europe, they're from Asia. You can just see we're not that far from our roots.
Okay, I definitely want to take a little bit of a left turn with this next question, but I want to make sure to get the plug in because this is an organization and cause that I also support. But you raise puppies,
Oh yeah,
guide dogs for the blind, right?
yeah,
How did you get involved with that?
they're right here, in fact. So I have probably my youngest son. He's the one who really wanted a dog, and my husband's not a dog guy, and so we'd been living in all places in Hong Kong. We were there for 4 years in a 44-story high rise, not having a dog there. When we repatriated, my husband said, you know what, if you can find a reason to have a dog, we'll have a dog. And so, oddly enough, that very week, the third grade went to a field trip to the Guide Dogs for the Blind. Over, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's a distance, but we went and we came home and we had a reason to have a dog. We had a function.
I love that.
So many dogs ago, and now I actually have shifted to breeders because it's a little easier with writing. So I have two breeders right now, and they're just the best. They're beautiful, wonderful dogs.
Oh, well, and I would also think, again, for that reason of having the dog, it also would make it a little bit easier on giving them up, right? Because you know that that's one of their purposes essentially, right? Is they are going to be going off to help someone else
Oh,
that is desperately in need.
so our first dog, who we probably fell head over heels in love with, he ended up with a young college boy, and he graduated, which is not typical. Like, over half don't graduate, but they go on to other dog careers that are really pretty interesting. But this first dog, who we loved so dearly, we were the Schmaltz family when we had to drop him off. It was so hard to say goodbye. And it turned out that this young man whom we met at graduation flew, and the very next day, his mother, they lived in Kansas, flew home. His mother texted and said, you're not going to believe this, but our son John took the dog to go see a friend, and that was something he had not done since his vision started disintegrating. And I just thought, this is 24 hours and his life has changed. And I've never looked back. It was just such a significant experience. So I have to admit, some dogs are easier to let go of than others. Some it's okay, and some really tug at your heart. But
I'm
I
sure.
do. And the people that are part of it are so nice. Dog people have a margin of error.
Like I said, it's an area I support also with guide dogs, canine companions,
Yeah,
service dogs. So definitely appreciate all of the effort that goes into the
yeah,
work with that.
yeah. Well,
Okay, so I wanted to get the plug in for that and talk
thank
about it.
you.
But now let's shift over to what we call our fresh fiction facts.
Okay.
Okay, so these are meant to be easy questions off the top of your head, not meant to stump you, but granted, sometimes we do. To start off with something maybe kind of easy, Who would you most want to be stuck in an elevator with?
Benjamin Franklin.
Ooh, good
Yeah.
answer. I like that.
Oh, wouldn't you love to get to know how does that man's mind work? I mean,
Exactly. Oh, wow. Okay. Um, what is one new hobby or practice that you've picked up recently?
well, I am knitting Christmas stockings for grandchildren, and I don't know how to knit, but I plunge in the intermediate level of all of life, thinking I can do it, and so I'm halfway through right now, and I'm just getting to that turn, which is, oh my gosh, that is so hard, but I'm
Got to
gonna
get that
do it.
heel and turn.
Yes,
Definitely.
yes, yeah, which is really advanced, and I don't know what I'm doing as a beginner.
Well, I mean, you could always just do it where it's just a single, so it's more like traditional stockings, maybe.
Like straight, just hanging
Yeah.
straight, like a scarf.
What is one luxury item or unnecessary product that you absolutely cannot live without?
Well, I love my Nespresso coffee machine, and it has probably has something to do with George Clooney on the commercials, but that is just the best way to start the day. I even take it on vacation, not flying, but if we are driving somewhere, I take it with me.
Now, of course, if George Clooney was delivering it, like in the commercial, that would definitely be my stock. Yes.
That was a marketing genius marketing plan.
How do you celebrate a new release?
Well, so Lost and Found just came out last week, and the funny thing is, a friend of mine said, "Are you busy?" And I thought, well, yeah, I am doing a lot of different interviews, but a lot of the work goes in a whole month ahead. I mean, you are really working hard to do weekly announcements or giveaways or things like that. So the day will often come and go, and it doesn't feel like it's as celebrated as it should be. And I actually really would like to acknowledge it more, but it's usually like in the middle of the week, and you're going and you're, got to hit my word count, got to babysit grandchildren, got to walk dogs, got to play tennis, got to keep going. So,
What childish thing do you still do as an adult?
well, the fun is tennis. I play a lot. I love it and enjoy it so much. And you feel like you're 10 again. Something about a ball and a racket.
Well, along those lines, what childish thing is, or which thing is much better as an adult than it was as a child?
Tennis. I'm so much better. I mean, it's amazing how much you have to learn about good sportsmanship and just strategy, and it's kind of a game of chess a little bit because you sort of have to figure out where's the open state of Montana or the open barn door to get that ball in, and it just involves so much more than I think what I would have expected as a young child playing, where you're just hitting.
Mhm. Okay. What is the one thing on your to-do list that you just constantly keep moving out?
Oh, pushing out. When I was listening to the people beforehand, they were a couple of them mentioned that what they're watching all the time is the Great British Baking Show, and and I love to cook, I love to bake. I would love to be really good at it. I mean, where you and when you look at what those people do, they are spending so
Amazing.
much time. And sometimes I think like these kids, Great British Baking kids, which impresses me so much that these 9 and 10-year-old kids have the ability to handle the feedback and the criticism. And then I think of this family behind them that is let the kitchen be a disaster day after day after day, and all the sugar and flour gone. And I mean, that is something I'm kind of saving up for my dotage to.
Mhm.
But I love it. It's so much fun, so relaxing. I never had enough time for it.
True, right? What is something that you own a ridiculous amount of?
I'm not a shopper. I have a lot of books. I do have a lot of books, and I do have a little free library out in front of my house.
Really?
And our the town I live in is unincorporated, so we don't have a library. So I think my little free library was the first in our town, and now there are many of them all over. And it is like a community watering hole. People just every single day, someone is in and out of the little free library, bringing books, taking books. It's just such a fun So books, I do have way too many. Like if I were to move, that would be daunting to pack up them.
It's amazing just how many authors we have where big surprise, books tends to be the answer to that question.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I know. Well, again, I listened to your people and I just thought the dedication they have to reading and reading a lot. It's just impressive. So impressive.
Well, what's the best book that you've read recently?
So I've been reading a book that I loved. It's nonfiction. I tend to read actually a lot of nonfiction. And it's called The Well-Lived Life, 102-Year-Old Doctors, Six Secrets to Health and Happiness at Every Age by Gladys McGarey. It is outstanding.
Oh,
I think
awesome.
everybody should read it. And a lot of what she talks about, I mean, she's still going strong, almost 103. She just gave up her driver's license.
Oh my
She
gosh.
believes, yeah, it's so smart, so quick. She was raised in India as a missionary. She's Caucasian American, but has just had, imagine a woman with a century of wisdom and insights. And this is what the book's about. And it really boils down to movement. She believes in movement. Our bodies, our minds, our souls, our emotions, our grief, we need to keep things moving. And I just love it. I'd love to be like her one day. She believes in 10-year plans and she still has one.
Oh, wow. Lovely. Mm, okay.
I know. I know.
Seriously, some days I can't plan next week very well. So what is your most dog-eared or reread copy of a book? What do you keep going back to?
Well, there's a couple of books by a woman named Catherine Marshall, and she has written a book called Christie that's very
Yes.
popular.
Yes.
But
I've read that one. Yeah.
and that kind of opened up Christian fiction. Like that she just, you know, created the whole category. But she's written a lot of nonfiction books, and I love her nonfiction books, love them. And I find myself, especially if there is a really hard situation in life, like a loss of a family member that we've had recently, or some things like that, I go to those books. I find a lot of peace and um, help through them. So I would highly recommend. They're hard to find because they're all out of print, but I just loved her. She influenced me as a young person, and along with I think Anne Lindbergh as well, Charles Lindbergh's wife. Both the two of them, and then Madeleine L'Engle, her nonfiction, all nonfiction, just really were the three writers that I read as a teenager that kind of opened the door to thinking of a career in writing.
I remember reading Christie. It was a book that my mom said I needed to read. So I was very young when I was reading it, and of course I was enamored with the romance element of the story, and the love triangle, and it's like,
Mhm.
oh, what is she going to decide? And it's still one where it's like I just get the warm fuzzies whenever I think about it. And
Mhm.
I loved when they did the TV. I'm like, so that's one of those books for me. Just lots of memories. So
Mhm. Mhm.
definitely another fan of hers.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, even though Lost and Found just came out, we are always wanting to know what's coming next. What are you working on now?
So I have a big year, and next year I have a lot of releases, almost like airplanes at a runway, stacked. And so I have, first will be, I've written this ice cream series that the third in the series will come out called Love on a Whim. And I'm going through galleys now, and I'm really excited about it. Just got the cover. It's going to be, I think, a wonderful wrap up to a series of a mom and a daughter who end up on Cape Cod, and they end up buying this ice cream shop thinking that it will be easy because everybody loves ice cream, and it's not. But it's a great, I'm really pleased. I think it's going to be a wonderful finish to the series. And behind, right after that, comes something very different, and it is four novellas, one by one. They'll release, the first three will release as an ebook, the fourth will be a print. So it'll kind of lead up. And they are three young girls who worked as teenagers in a flower shop in the South, and something dreadful happens, and it sends all three to different directions. So each novella brings the girls back one by one by one. And they each have had a very interesting career. One is a floral artist for high-end weddings. One is a flower farm, runs a flower farm. One is it works in a flower shop in Savannah, Georgia. So the fourth, it brings it kind of each one is a very satisfying story, but the fourth brings it all together and you find out what happened that was so dreadful. So.
And with that, of course, what is the best way for our readers to keep in touch with you and find out the details of these upcoming releases?
And thank you for asking that, because my newsletter is the place to go. And so if you can go to my website, suzannewoodsfisher.com, there's an easy way to get on the newsletter. And that's where the first of everything goes out, the first cover reveal, the first of the giveaways, the first for contests. And I try to take very good care of my people. So yeah, I hope people will go there.
Great. Well, Suzanne, thank you again for joining us this evening, but stick around for some happy hour and further questions from our readers offline.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.